What's up, everybody? Welcome to Mortuary Gaming, the channel where I trudge through the mass graves of long-forgotten games, digging up their remains and recounting their stories as best I can. I'm kind of like a ghost whisperer for games that haunt storage units and bargain bins.
In order to tell you my story, I have to tell you theirs.
Today I'll be telling the tale of Earache Extreme Metal Racing, a budget kart racing advert game that not only sees monsters and demons impaling each other with Mad Max murder machines driving across hell, but also while jamming out to the heaviest soundtrack in video games history. Oh, and did I mention it's also a shovelware game developed by Data Design Interactive? But before we get into the game, piece together its history, and speak to some of the folks involved, I want to take a moment and share with all of you a piece of gaming news that should have many of you retro gaming enthusiasts very excited. This week's video is supported by YRGB, also known as Yandex Retro Games Battle. Since 2019, Yandex has been bringing together countless developers, game designers, and pixel artists to hold the Yandex Retro Games Battle, a tournament that sees developers compete head-to-head to develop for a multitude of retro platforms. This year, they're focusing exclusively on developing games for the ZX Spectrum, including both 48K and 128K versions. Participants of this year's YRGB will have a chance to not only develop their own game for the legendary ZX Spectrum computer, but to also have your game evaluated by a competent body of judges of game industry professionals. And when I say competent, I mean it. These people are really into the Spectrum, and I love it. Oh, and did I mention there was a cash prize? Because of having your game recognized by leading industry experts wasn't enough, you'll get paid on top of it. But say you aren't all that experienced and have always wanted to give something like this a try. The Spectrum is an incredible system to start on, as it's where all of this started from, really. So if that sounds as cool to you as it does to me, hit the link in the description or the pinned comment below and go to yrgb.org to get started. Remember, the deadline for submissions is July 28th. Instead of beginning today's story talking about the game's developer, Data Design, we will get to you later. Let's start with something I love just as much as video games, but never get to talk about: death metal. Earache Records, where the game gets its namesake, is a British record label founded in the mid-80s by a bunch of guys who would change the landscape of metal forever before going on to be the most cringe, boomer-ass, dumb fucks in music history.
As always with a lot of stuff we do, we were too far ahead of the curve.
But at the time, they were awesome. These guys were one of the first record labels to ever cater specifically to extreme metal, and the 80s and 90s would see them release numerous historical and genre-defining records for bands such as Napalm Death, Carcass, Morbid Angel, Bolt Thrower, Terrorizer, Entombed, just to name a few. Extreme metal, for those with a healthy sense of self and good relationships with your parents, is an overarching genre that includes the likes of death metal, black metal, grindcore, sludge, slam, basically anything and everything heavier, less commercial, and less accessible than Metallica and Black Sabbath. Similar to punk rock in its own forest of subgenres, this is a type of music that was, by design, never meant to reach any real semblance of mainstream success, and was essentially by the fans and for the fans. Genres and movements created by a bunch of pissed off young people pushing the envelope to see who could be faster, heavier, more intense, and more antagonistic than that which came before. But there is one major difference. Unlike extreme metal, punk would reach massive cultural and commercial relevancy in the 90s and 2000s, and with the exception of Cannibal Corpse, Cradle of Filth, and maybe a couple others, the same can't really be said about extreme metal. You could say that's because their vocals often sound like someone being drowned in a truck stop toilet, and the drums sound like wet shoes in a dryer, and you may be right, but I think there's a bit more to it than that. See, to go back to video games for a moment, in 1999, many of you likely know that Tony Hawk's Pro Skater released and proved that the inclusion of licensed music in video games could help skyrocket an entire genre into the mainstream. But what about extreme metal? In fact, to this very day, I can't think of a single video game that has ever featured such legendary bands as Torso Fuck, Cock and Ball Torture, Anal Cunt, or Fetal Fist Fuck, even a single time. The point is, the idea of a game being made up exclusively of extreme metal music, even as an advert game for a label, is pretty cool. As long as you don't know who that is, or oh god, who that is, this shit looks pretty badass. We've got a Morbid Angel cart, which is a red Mad Max buggy with horns on the front, one demon behind the wheel and another standing between dual exhausts manning a mounted bow that shoots fucking skull arrows. The biomechanical cart is a dystopian ATV with a dude in the back holding a giant hammer axe, and most impressively of all, the municipal waste cart is a red fucking dump truck with dead mutants in the back, beautifully referencing their album cover for Hazardous Mutation. It even drops barrels of toxic waste onto the carts behind it. It's perfect. This game's doing more for extreme metal culture than the Sanguisugabog t-shirt industrial complex. Where are all of the stats for the carts, you may be wondering? You don't need stats when you got riffs. Speaking of riffs, I can't use any of the music included in this game for fear of copyright infringement, so I'll be using music from lesser known death metal bands that I know personally and got their permission to use. Playlists will be linked below. So you choose your character, which level you want to play, ignore the loading bars that are literally just moving PNGs sitting on top of what was clearly going to be a much cooler loading bar, and 3, 2, 1, go! Wait, I'm not moving. 3, 2, 1, go! So yeah, remember when I said this game was developed by Data Design? It plays about as hideously as you probably could have imagined. It moves much faster than Data Design's other racing games released around the time, like Rig Racer 2, Mythmaker Superkart GP, Urban Extreme, Action Girls Racing, Monster Trucks Extreme Off-Road, not to be confused with Extreme Off-Road, and it handles much differently too. Yes, I played all of those games prior to making this video. I am the hardest working independent journalist in gaming. The carts here feel like spicy marshmallows, many of which are so fucking thick they can barely fit on the more narrow shortcuts. Okay, so damage in kart racers has always had some level of surprise to it, and I definitely didn't expect this game to necessarily notify me when I'm about to take damage, but it sure would have been nice. Instead, it feels as if you're racing across a minefield filled with invisible mines, and you never know when you're about to get exploded and sent barreling through the level boundaries. Offensive item pickups are relegated to just 2 different options and are triggered by hitting the correct zombie hesher walking through the arena, which will either electrocute someone in front of you, or I actually couldn't figure out what the other one does. I think it just makes them explode. See, but like, you know how in most kart racers, when you take damage, there's a reliable consequence? Regardless of what it is, when you receive damage, there is some kind of control that you will still have over the kart, even if you're just standing still, right? Well, in extreme metal racing, that doesn't happen. This is a kart racer with ragdoll physics. When you get hit, you just fly off to whatever direction you were sent in, either by your own speed or the oncoming projectile, and when that sends you driving the wrong way or outside of the map entirely, it can really put a damper on the race. It probably goes without saying at this point that a kart racer with ragdoll physics and mechanics about as conventional as free jazz,
what's happening? The shapes, the chaos,
would probably refrain from the inclusion of rubber banding in its mechanics. The way this game handles rubber banding is actually kind of cool. When you're in first place, the power-ups and speed boosts just change function completely. The zombie power-ups go from being homicidal options to suicidal ones, activating on the player instead of another racer, and the speed boosts deactivate for you entirely. This is honestly a pretty neat workaround for a game only being developed in a few months, and having to avoid the zombies in first place adds a welcome layer of additional strategy. But we're not here for the mechanics, damn it. We're here for some death metal ass shit. And death metal ass shit, Data Design absolutely delivers. A sentence never before uttered by man, copyright trademark. The levels are dripping with metal excess and hellish badassery, turning a standard kart racing track into a mini golf track built for kaijus and demons in hell. Mangled corpses hanging from meat hooks, conveyor belts that carry dead bodies through the chomping mouth of a metal mechanical spider. We've got your bog standard hell level and graveyard level, but we've also got a slaughterhouse factory level with everything from A platform filled with anvils? Rooms filled with TVs playing death metal music videos like a f***ed up Journeys? A giant metal cage that carries us over another section of the map with giant exhaust pipe tendrils coming down from the ceiling like the tentacles of a giant robot squid? Data Design is famous for reskinning their games and releasing the same games over and over and over again, and this is not just some lowly reskin. I've done the research. I've played the other games released that same year based on the same engine. They all have the exact same menu layout, the same feel, the same mechanics, they even have the same fucking music. I can't believe it. I found the Data Design game that's actually cool and unique and illustrative of actual effort. It's like I found the Ark of the Covenant. Is the game like good or whatever? I mean, no, it feels like driving piles of poopy laundry through hell, but for Data Design, calling a game not very good but actually kinda cool is tantamount to a Game of the Year contender. Now it's time to answer the big question. Who the hell is Data Design? English developer Data Design Interactive, or DDI, was founded in the late 1980s by Stuart Green, and while you would probably imagine the guy who founded one of the most infamous shovelware developers of all time would probably be some sketchy suit with no interest or care for video games, this actually could not be farther from the truth. After being one of the first people to buy a ZX Spectrum in 1982, he learned not only how to play the games, which is a Herculean task in itself in many cases, but also how to program it. Before long, he began working for other companies such as PSS and Mirrorsoft on consoles like the Spectrum, all the old school consoles whose names sounded like the names of spaceships.
The Amstrad 6128. Who says business and pleasure don't mix?
He was also the first person to use plastic video boxes to put his games in because they were much cheaper for him to do that by himself than by using custom die-cut cardboard. Things for Data Design would start exploding during the 5th and 6th console generation when they would start getting work for much larger properties such as Lego, Nickelodeon, and Tonka. While many studios of this size could make a solid career out of pumping out licensed games for toy brands like these, this wasn't quite in the cards for Data Design, as they would not be tapped to make another game for any of these guys after just 3 years. Now, I don't know the specifics, but I don't think it would be a stretch to say that this likely put DDI in a tough spot. If they didn't want to end up another casualty to the great Y2K purge that eliminated hundreds of smaller studios who were about as old and small as they were, they needed to act fast. And the answer to all of their problems was a proprietary game engine, one that would allow them to not only develop games quickly, but most importantly, allow them to easily swap assets between games. It was called the Gods Engine, and this piece of tech would be the catalyst to Data Design's continued, albeit sickly, existence. This engine would enable Data Design to release 32 titles between 2004 and 2009. Yes, you heard that right, 32 games released in 5 years. So I had to know, how many of these 32 games are actually something new? Like, how often did they actually build a game whose levels and gameplay differ from that which came before? These are the kind of questions that keep me up at night, and awake I will lie no longer. I booted up every single game released during this period, yes, all 32 of them. And do you know how many of these games I would charitably call unique? Like 6 or 7. To the shock of no one, this would give DDI quite a reputation amongst anyone paying attention, but that's kind of the beauty of a model like theirs. Nobody was paying attention to them, which allowed them to just greenlight whatever idea they wanted. Sure, some of the games like Ninja Breadman, Anubis 2, and Mythmakers would get some press at the time and would go on to become legendary among YouTube essayists and the like, but on the whole, journalists aren't paying attention to shovelware. They're not paying attention to kids games and budget sports games, so DDI and others like them were free to just pump these things out one after another to unsuspecting and most definitely poor children. Throughout the 2000s, DDI was more harmful to impoverished and underprivileged children than 19th century coal mines. Okay, but what about Earache? How did Earache Records come into all of this? Well, contrary to how they've spun the story in the years since the game's release, something we'll be touching on later, the game was not conceived by anyone at the label, but rather by a 15-year-old girl named Sky Nash who was attending a nearby secondary school. And wouldn't you know it, I managed to speak to her.
I I am the hardest working independent journalist in
Here in England, when you're in senior school, you can do work experience wherever you like within reason of it being age suitable, as long as you can organize it and the company is willing to take you on. I wanted to spend mine at a games developer, and since there was one nearby that Dad was working with, it was easy to set up. I spent my time learning how games were made, testing them, and coming up with ideas for my own. I really wanted to play the game to great music, like the Tony Hawk's games. Who wouldn't want to play a racing game running over monsters to epic metal music? Earache was our top choice since they had so many great bands on their label. My dad got in touch with them to see if they'd do a deal with us, and they did. I came up with the initial ideas. Stuart had told me to go and design a game I'd want to make and play, so I was out of his hair. I ended up putting together a pretty big document with ideas for the game, levels, and more. Stuart loved it and ran with it. It was great fun watching it all come together. The college I went to for my A-levels was actually right across the road from DDI, which was brilliant. During breaks, I'd head over there to test and play games, picking up bits of knowledge along the way. And it makes total sense that Stuart Green would greenlight the idea, as he was seemingly very open to new projects. Too open to new projects, some might argue, and would honestly just kind of greenlight whatever so long as they could get it done and out the door as soon as possible.
Yeah, the decision was just, a lot of them could be jokes or just a brain fart, and they'll become a full game. I think Ninja Bread Man was Mike's idea, was just a joke. He's just like, ooh, he's gingerbread man, but he's a ninja. Isn't that funny? Okay, game. And so some of this stuff happened. And so no doubt she was like well into metal, like do a metal game where they race around and punch each other in the face. And like, okay, game, let's go. I think I built a little Anubis too, just started just farting around, and they're like, okay, game.
Nobody wants to make bad games, and while I'm sure many who have worked for studios like this would have rather made games they could be a bit more proud of, the people making these games were, by and large, not made up of assembly lines filled with miserable developers wishing to reflect that misery upon unsuspecting customers. In the case of data design, they were largely filled with 20-year-olds getting their foot in the door for the first time and having a better time than you may have expected. At least within the recollection of Sam King, a former data design employee who worked as an artist on the majority of their games from this era.
I think we're all in our early 20s. The lead artist was like old, and he was 26 or 27. I mean, honestly, we just go out and get pissed every night and stuff like that. We're in our 20s, so we're just partying. The management they had debt, and they were more concerned about pushing these games out to relieve their debt. But the people on the floor, like, I'm still friends with them today, a lot of them. It's like we were mostly working class, like English people, kind of a lot of developers in England and stuff can tend to be posh. But like, we were in Birmingham, everybody's working class, we used to go out drinking together. There's kind of attitude like shit's fucked, but we're just gonna make it. And it was cool, I liked it. Nice people, very down-to-earth group. And like the programmers who worked there, they'd never really programmed before. They were good programmers. The QA people came straight from college. I was a random South African who pitched up from across the world, and they had me making their art. Mike, his family were bricklayers, and he ended up doing like covers and building a lot of the IPs as well. They were all like sort of a rough lot, and we really enjoyed ourselves together and made these terrible games. Terrible games, but it was good. I mean, we were having fun. And Data Design, for their credit, they always paid us, and they paid us decent enough, and they tried their best to supply that. I think at that point, that company was in a lot of debt.
So not only was this a studio that would hire inexperienced developers and get their foot in the door, they would greenlight projects off a joke and even put inexperienced high schoolers to work using their ideas and getting their name into the credits of a video game. I mean, sure, the games aren't good, no one's denying that, but I don't know, man, I feel like there's something to be said for all these positive experiences and careers they helped create. Shovelware or not, you did a thing, and I'm very proud of you. Earache Records announced the game in the spring of 2006 and promised fans dark atmospherics, crisp, exciting graphics, and of course, the first ever video game to have a soundtrack made up of entirely extreme metal music. For experienced necromancers only. Yeah, because you gotta perform dark fucking magic to play the goddamn thing. Eternal damnation awaits you in the bowels of hell. The world's first exclusively death metal and grindcore PS2 computer game is PS2 PS2 computer game, naturally it is Earache that leads the way. See, it's shit like this. This is why everyone hates you. This is why metal elitists are the fucking worst.
Look how straight these lines are. Who made this for you, your fucking grandma?
Leading the way where? Where are we going? Let me off of this thing! Oh, but it wasn't just musical boundaries and level boundaries they were breaking through, because believe it or not, Earache Extreme Metal Racing was also going to be multi-platform, releasing on PC, PS2, PSP, and the Wii, but it does not stop there. They would add to many of their online posts and forums that they were already planning for a sequel, adding support of the use for Guitar Hero guitars, and even a bloodier 18+ re-release. Finding reviews for the game was particularly fun this time around because it means I get to dig through archived MySpace posts and comments, which is by far my favorite part of this entire process. Closed Casket with 2 Ks writes, "Hey, I know this may seem like an unreasonable question, but I noticed you have Tom on your top 8. Any chance you could, kick him off of there and put up Closed Casket? That would be sweet. I'll add you to mine also." To which a user with the name My Life Has Become a Downward Spiral would respond, "Yeah, I agree with Closed Casket. Tom is not for the metalheads, he's for the emos."
Those were the days.
The promised releases of upgrades such as Guitar Hero support, whatever the that was gonna look like, a Wii release, a PSP release, a sequel, and an 18+ version would all sadly never come to fruition. Because of course they wouldn't, because why the hell would you promise all of this stuff before the game even ships? It's almost as if Earache is kind of full of shit.
Around that time, kids are like, I don't want to pay $10-15 for a CD, but oh shit, there's a new video game and it's $45-50. Shut up and take my money. Shut up and take my money. And if you look now with in-game music and things like Fortnite, we're on the right track. It was the right idea, just we'll probably, as always with a lot of stuff we do, we're too far ahead of the curve.
But this wasn't their idea. They agreed to do it because it was incredibly cheap for them, potentially even free. They worked with Data Design, a developer they admit they were familiar with before agreeing to work with them, and were so high on their own supply, they promised all this extra shit, and of course, none of it ever happened. But look, Earache has been responsible for a lot of pioneering. I have to give that to them. Aside from what they've done for extreme metal 30, 40 years ago, who's counting, they would later go on to be the first record label to put a song from any of their artists into the blockchain.
Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for.
And they're still going. Just a week ago or so, they partnered with Korean tech company Muse Live to sell what are basically hit clips, little keychain boxes that apparently do quite well for K-pop that allows listeners to scan the thing into your phone to get access to the album. But that's just some of the more entertaining blunders of the label. I could do an entire video on the numerous scandals, lawsuits, and alleged theft of art and copyright from their artists over the years, but let's get back to Data Design. The unlikely hero of today's story, Data Design Interactive would go on to see another few years of prolific releases, specifically on the Wii, but would eventually close their doors for good in 2012. Most employees still work in the industry today, with Sam King even having worked for Epic and Disney, and Stuart Green is still knocking about as the CEO of Carnival Games, who is, yes, another shovelware studio making games for Nintendo. This man's love for the game is unshakable, and I respect it. I find stories like these so fascinating, and they so often go untold. So before I end the video, I just want to give a huge thank you to Sam King and Sky Nash for giving us all of their time and their stories. Games preservation has always played a huge role in why this channel exists, and while it is of magnanimous importance to do everything we can to prevent games from falling between the cracks of memory and accessibility, it is of equal importance that we tell the stories of these games and how they came to be in the first place. Video games are, like all art, innately human, the result of collective or individual human experience, and as such deserve to have their histories etched into something. This, I guess. Alright, I'm gonna end it there, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this, and remember, I am covering every PS2 horror game. It's been a while. I'm trying to get interviews for all of them, so they're taking a little longer to come out than some of my other content, so bear with me. I've got some awesome stuff in the works for all of you retro horror fans and fans of retro video game nasties in general. Enormous shout out to my Patreon supporters, StollenBunz, Baron, Hot Antonio, and Mr. Nobody, as well as YouTube members, Baron and Racoon Peddlar. Thank you all so much, and I'll smell you later.